Well, excuse me about that. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bill Lacey, Director of the Dole Institute. I think I know most of you. I want to welcome you to our first summer discussion group. Appreciate your supporting our summer programming, and wanted to make sure everybody knows that we have another program tomorrow afternoon featuring Dr. Jim Wilbanks, who has been with the Leavenworth History Program for a number of years. It is on the last stand of South Vietnam, specifically on the Battle of Swan Lock. So come by tomorrow at 3. That'll be a fascinating presentation. I'm very excited about our summer discussion group. For those of you, many of you have been here before, but I don't know how many of you have seen our summer discussion groups, but we do them for 5 weeks, and we didn't get a list of the specific dates on here. Do we have anything that is? All of the individual sessions? Okay, I missed that somehow. Anyway, we'll be skipping a couple weeks, and we're going to do one on a different day, I think. But just keep your list and stay in touch, and don't miss any of these because they're all going to be very fascinating. Christina Luhn is our summer fellow, and she proposed. Actually, I looked this up, Christina, a little bit less than a year ago. She proposed this study group. And normally, for those of you who come to our discussion groups, you know that we're usually several people committed. We usually have 2 or 3 fellows committed in advance. And so it was going to be quite a while before we could work Christina in. So I thought this topic is so critically important, though, that I emailed her one day and I said, hey, would you consider doing it this summer? Because we will... we'll be able to cover all the same topics. We'll just have to reduce it to 5 sessions. And she agreed, and delighted that she can join us. So I've known her about a year. She's been to a number of Dole Institute programs here. She worked as a legislative assistant for Congressman Larry Wynn from Kansas a few years ago. She worked on the White House, it was the National Security Council, right?
Correct.
When President Reagan was president, and I think you worked mostly with Vice President Bush at the time, and you have been working on this various binational product programs since then, and so she's got the exact right background to bring some fascinating guests and some fascinating discussions on this topic to us. So please welcome as our summer fellow, Christina Luhn. Christina?
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? No, you can't. All right. Oh, I can see you're going to be trouble. Okay. That would be true. Well, I'm so glad to have this opportunity. I'm actually from Kansas. I wasn't born in Kansas, but I moved here when I was 3 months old, so it's as close as I can get. I started out in southern Kansas, Coffeyville, and actually lived on a farm for the first 7 years of my life, and eventually ended up in Shawnee, which I'm sure all of you know is a nice little suburb of Kansas City. And I've been in and out of Kansas and the Midwest most of my life, but I managed to spend some time in Washington, D.C. and overseas in Paris working. And then for almost 8 years, I worked along the U.S Mexico border in kind of headquartered outside of San Diego. And I ran, actually when I say I ran, I actually got it up and running, an economic development initiative that partnered San Diego County, Imperial County, and Baja California for global competition. And we got our original funding from the federal government. They were actually intrigued to see how kind of a place like San Diego, which has, an urban knowledge-based economy and an agrarian economy, which is the county next door, could partner around economic issues. And since both counties had very strong cultural and economic ties across the border, we threw in, we'd like to include, as we build our strategy, Baja California. And they said, actually, we're glad you suggested that because the border's big. And, trying to tackle some of these economic development issues how do you bring the border in? How do you collaborate across the border? And so they were very intrigued. And so that's what I did for almost 8 years, got it up and running. And so from that experience, working on the border, I learned a lot of things. I had people call me all the time and they would say, are you still going over to Mexico? Because, we saw on the news all this stuff, and I'm like, yes, it's not happening here. It's like anything. I'm sure you have relatives that don't live in the area, and whenever there's a tornado outbreaks, anywhere in Kansas, people will say, was it close, or are you okay? And you're like, okay, it wasn't even close. So you understand when you live someplace and work someplace, you have a different sensibility of what's going on and what the environment is. And so I had a great opportunity then to learn about the challenges of the border, but also the real opportunities. And I say opportunities because, Mexico isn't going away. We can't just cut a little snip along the line and say, okay, we want a different country right next to us. Mexico's there. It's our neighbor, just as Canada is our neighbor. And so how can we collaborate? What are the things, and what makes sense for us to collaborate? And how does that benefit all of us? And so that was always my approach. One of the other things, and one of the reasons why I wanted to do this and proposed it, because I worked very closely with so many stakeholders along the border, who that's their whole world. They hadn't lived anywhere else. They hadn't worked anywhere else. And I always thought it was interesting to go to meetings or listen to them talk about the challenges of getting the rest of both countries to understand what the reality of the border was and what they felt they needed to make the border work better for everybody. Because Baja has the same problem that Southern California does. We're both about as far away from our federal governments as possibly could be. And so the reason that's important, of course, is because the border is an international issue, and so many of the decisions on how the border functions are made a very long way away by people who may or may never have been to the border. So one of the reasons I wanted to do this was to try and kind of break down that gulf. I'm a Kansan. In fact, everybody there learned very quickly that, well, I'm from Kansas. And it actually helped me a lot growing up in kind of a border state with our own little border issues. And so I thought that would be very valuable to bring some of these experts to Kansas, so Kansans could hear from the experts, and the experts could hear from Kansans about things that they're concerned or interested or just have questions. I worked very closely in San Diego with the Consul General, from Mexico, who was a lovely woman and who now finds herself in another part of the country. Raleigh, that's right. She's in the Carolinas. And so when I had reached out to her, said, would you be interested in coming and be part of this discussion? She said, oh gosh, Christina, I'd love to, but I'm in Carolinas now. And so she put me in contact with our guest this afternoon, who's Alfonso Navarro-Bernachi, correct?
That's correct. Thank you.
And Consul General is your title?
Yes,
right.
Head Consul, yeah.
Head Consul, okay. So, can I just call you Alfonso and you can call me Christina?
Please, Christina.
All right.
Thank you so much.
That'll work well. So he works in what would be the equivalent of our State Department, the Secretariat of External or Foreign Relations. And I don't know, how many of you have been to Mexico before? Oh, well, good. Well, that makes it easier then. If you've ever been in Mexico or any other country and you lose your passport or a whole range of stuff, our U.S. has consulates all over the world. And so just as the Mexican government has consulates here. And so in addition to having worked in Mexico City, kind of the equivalent of what would be the State Department, Alfonso has served overseas. I think you were in Latin America.
Yes, in Ecuador.
In Ecuador.
Yes.
But also has served in a number of places in the United States, including San Diego. He was there before me, but he was at the consulate in San Diego, and then you were also in Arizona. So he served in 2 border states, but I can tell you from traveling up and down the border, it couldn't be more different in terms of their border infrastructure, their border relations, just a whole range of things. And now he finds himself here in the Midwest, which is a long way from the border, but nonetheless, the issues are equally compelling. And one of the things that I wanted to do is have a conversation about what that actually means. What does a consulate do? And from his perspective, kind of what he sees the value of collaboration, how that can benefit both countries. So just to begin, could you tell just a little bit more about your background? How did you end up in the equivalent of the State Department?
Yes, thank you very much, and thanks for having me here today and for your interest in this particular issue. Yeah, the Mexican Foreign Service is basically actually is the oldest civil service in Mexico. So we have a long tradition of service and developing good practices. And currently, in order to be a member of the Foreign Service, you need to take a public exam, and you compete with several other people, and then you get a place in the Foreign Service. That was back in 1993. That's when I entered into the Foreign Service. So, and the Foreign Service also accepts people from several academic and professional backgrounds. So in my particular case, I was working as a journalist, and then I got notice of this public contest or public exam to be a member of the service, so I decided to apply for, and I was accepted. But in several members of my promotion, we have obviously people with international relation studies, economists, obviously lawyers, and several other academic backgrounds. So that's basically, and then once that you are admitted, you have the option to get a master's degree in diplomatic studies, so I decided to go for it. And after a while working in Central Headquarters, I was posted in Ecuador. That was my first posting abroad in Quito. I was there for 6 years. Basically doing political analysis work and also some functions of press attaché. And afterwards, I was also in charge of the consular services. That is basically the area of any embassy that take care of, in this case, Mexican nationals that requires services like getting a document because it was stolen or you need to replace it, or to assist certainly those that are in some form of disgrace, those that are arrested, those that are hospitalized, or that require some form of assistance. So those were my first 6 years in the service. Then I was transferred to San Diego. I remember well, I just arrived in the United States September 26, 2001, so few days after the 9/11. It was quite an interesting experience because actually I witnessed it through the TV set in my office in Quito when the actual events were occurring back in 2001, and we were all in shock. So I was posted in San Diego. I worked there for 5 years. Then I was promoted to Phoenix, Arizona as a deputy consul, so basically the second in command in the consulate in Phoenix, and then returned to Mexico City for a 5-year period of working in Central Headquarters. So, and after that, last year I was promoted to head consul, so this is my first experience as a head of office. Mexico, as you know, have 50 consulates all across the United States, and Kansas City, the consulate in Kansas City is one of them, which consular district includes both Missouri, Kansas, and western part of Oklahoma. So that would be, in a nutshell, my trajectory in the Foreign Service so far.
Well, Good. So, although the consulates all have kind of similar similar functions, I mean, whether, you know, it's serving territory of the United States for your, you know, the Mexican citizens that live in those areas, there's still some very different sensibilities of the different regions. I mean, the obvious is that here we are in the middle of the United States, and you know, San Diego, you're literally on the border, which, by the way, if you notice this picture, when Bill asked me to do this, the first thing he said was, no PowerPoints. And I said, okay, fine. But I did have some folks that I worked with in Tijuana who had commissioned this photo to show the connectivity between Tijuana and San Diego. It's an area, in fact, it's the only area along the U.S. Mexico border where the Mexican side is as big, or they're very similar in size now. Yes. So you have Tijuana, which has over 1 million people. San Diego County has, well, actually 3 million. And then Mexicali, which is further east, yes, across from Calexico, has approximately 1 million folks. So it's a pretty dense yet spread out area. But the reason I wanted to show this was because there is a lot of connectivity. And not just because they share this territory, because there are a lot of businesses that do business across the border. It's not just folks who come across to shop, although that's an incredibly important piece. And when I first started working on this project and met with a lot of people who had been there for years doing this, you know, like explained to me how it's changed, you know, how it's changed over the years. And they said, well, the first thing was after 9/11, you know, you had a much different experience crossing the border, and at different times, whenever there's some international incident and the border all but shuts down, the big impact is on the U.S. side on all of the malls and the stores, because a lot of folks come across the border to shop, and I mean, it's substantial. We hear complaints all the time from the companies that own the big malls all up and down the border when that occurs. But there's more to it than just people who come across the shop. There are a lot of other reasons for collaboration. But I just wanted you guys to see just how close these two regions really are. And so your experience, can you tell us just a little bit about, say, how your experiences have been similar in some of the things that you've done and how they've differed? You know, like, how's San Diego different than Arizona?
Yes, and thank you. Just at the beginning of your comments, you were mentioning that for this cycle, for these conferences, you will be joined by experts. And thanks for your kind words. I consider myself more a practitioner than an expert, because we have, particularly when you serve in a consulate, you are hands-on on the issues on a daily basis. Just from interacting with a Mexican national that is in need of specific services, or her or his needs need to be addressed in a specific and professional manner. But also, for instance, last month we have an event here in Lawrence, in Kansas in the University of Kansas, in which we were promoting, but more than promoting, we're explaining the benefits of the North America Free Trade Agreement, and with a specific focus on the Kansas economy, on the state of Kansas economy, and why the commerce between Kansas and Mexico. I mean, we're talking about regions, we are talking about specific parts of the country that actually have benefits from for instance, from NAFTA. So it's, I would say, it's the world of a consulate right now, and I guess it's also true for several countries, and U.S. is not the exception. The world of a consulate abroad is like a small embassy, with the difference that you are not posted in the national capital. But other than that, I have the fortune of having received and visited Governor Brownback, but also Governor Grittens in Missouri, and I have close contact with mayor of my current hometown, that is Kansas City, Missouri, but also with the mayor of Holland in the other side of Kansas City, and several other regional authorities, because that's part of the work that we call consular diplomacy. It's diplomacy to the work of consulates. It's promotion, but also promoting the contributions of your country, but also of your fellow nationals to the economy, society, and even values of this part of the country. So that would be the basic layout for the consular network, and then you start to have a specific focus when you talk about San Diego, Phoenix, Boston, or even Omaha, Nebraska. So that would be the panorama. Yeah.
So, what have been the biggest challenges of your job?
Well, right now, and this is also a career, so you are given growing responsibilities. Right now, my main responsibility, I am in charge of our office that serves about 500,000 Mexican nationals in my consular district. I am in charge of a staff of about 22 people, and it's a complex operation that we have here in Kansas City. But so you need to take time for supervising the daily work of an office to provide services, issuing documents, participate in consular protection actions, but also promoting trade, good relationships between both countries. So at this time, I guess one of the main challenges is addressing specific needs of Mexican Americans that actually have anxiety about what is happening. We serve and we cater to several mixed status families, for instance, second or third generation Mexican Americans, but also married to recently migrated people that they have kids, so they form families, or they are married to a U.S. Women or men. And so you start seeing the complexity of how our societies actually interact. So, and when you have this concern about what the new immigration rules are going to be, or simply you start to listen to some specific messages from political actors or from actually elected authorities, then you start to see also how this is affecting important part of the communities that live in this part of the country.
One of the things that I always think is interesting for someone, a practitioner
Yes.
like you, who has spent most or a good part of your career along the border, and then now you find yourself in the Midwest. What's been one of the things that surprised you the most about being here in the Midwest now?
Well, obviously, being in this, because you have this region of Kansas City and both sides of the line state.
Yeah.
State line is, there is so many integration, so I cannot help like comparing my experience back in Tijuana and San Diego, because it's, even you have a state line, but you have people from Johnson County working and conducting business in Jackson County, Missouri, and vice versa. So there's a region. You have a region. There are several businesses exporting and conducting transactions all across the globe from that part of the country, of the region. But also you learn to appreciate, for instance, how welcoming is this part of the country, how understanding is many people in the Kansas City area and the Kansas City metro area. And that's also gives me the opportunity also to interact with several other members of the Society of Southwestern Kansas. It's a part of the state where there's a large Mexican-American community, but also in the eastern part of Missouri, in St. Louis, where you find social diversity and such a welcoming attitude. So I guess it's, but on the other hand, also having the experience of having worked in the border, for me it's easier to try to approach maybe in a proactive and maybe imaginative way to local authorities. Because I remember, for instance, when I was posted in San Diego, you see how, for instance, the law enforcement community interacted. Back in 2001, I remember this telecommunication system, the Nextel telephones is more like a walkie-talkie.
Yeah.
And then you have one of the San Diego Police Department liaison officers calling to his counterparts in Tijuana because they were working in a specific case, from an Amber Alert to some more serious law enforcement issues. And they were interacting like this, talking through a telephone. So you see that the cooperation is good. So in this case, talking about here, this Kansas City area where I am posted right now, well, I can understand why having a close contact with the chief of police, with the mayors, is also important, not only for promoting the interests of my country, of my fellow nationals, but also for promoting a better understanding from a local perspective of what is the U.S.-Mexico relationship.
So now you've been doing this for
23 years.
23 years,
Yes.
wow. I was going to get to that. 20 something years.
Yes.
So how has, I mean, obviously there's some major changes in relations between the two countries. Some of them have been good. I mean, there's been a lot of progress, but some of them are challenging, especially right now. What have you seen in your experience that's changed the most between relations between the two countries?
Well, in my first years as a diplomat, and before that, because I've been always, I mean, as a journalist, and then when I was getting my major and my bachelor's degree, I was always interested in politics. And I remember that, for instance, back in the 1980s, there was this concern in the United States, but also in Mexico, regarding some parts of the bilateral relationships that were actually, red or yellow signs. And at that time, maybe the countries interacting with a different set of values, and also the work was quite different. You have the conflict in Central America, for instance, that was an issue of several differences between U.S. and Mexico. And then you have the beginning of the problem of drugs, the drug trafficking, and the drugs being produced in the region. So the countries at that point, they were faced with the need of learning how to cooperate. And then, I guess, in the 90s, there was this theory of this way to approach the bilateral relationship that, for instance, they say in Mexico, okay, let's put the drug issue in one particular compartment. Then we have the trade issue, and then we have, for instance, immigration. And then the countries started to learn how to cooperate, how to talk about our differences, but also our commonalities. And then I guess those were the fundamentals of a new relationship. And then you get to the point that both countries were able to start negotiating, also with Canada, the NAFTA, and then you can see the whole picture of a complex and rich relationship. And I guess there's no other way. I mean, the relationship is so strong by any metric that you need to learn how to deal with it in its different issues and then move forward.
So much of the binational discussion has been around trade issues, which are obviously, sitting here in Kansas, are incredibly important. Mexico just moved into the first place for Kansas export market. So it's incredibly important. But besides trade, what are some of the other important issues that have to get decided or that collaborating on between the two countries that you see besides trade? Because we'll come back to trade.
Yes, of course. Well, I mean, and you have witnessed this at the border. We have, for instance, common infrastructure issues that need to be addressed. I mean, in the Tijuana-San Diego border, we don't have a river. Well, actually, it's a river, but not like a Rio Grande or Rio Bravo River back in the eastern part of the country. But you also need to take care of border crossings, bridges, public safety in both sides of the border. So, public safety, border infrastructure, customs facilitation. And then you start to see the specific parts of the agenda: agriculture, trade, agriculture, food safety. And at some point, the Mexico relationship, the U.S. Mexico relationship started to have these high-level groups, so that the experts and from the several agencies of the government start cooperating and start and basically take care of the daily issues with the support certainly of local authorities. And this is particularly true at the border. You cannot implement, or you cannot talk about public policy in terms of managing the border without having the input from California and Baja California, Arizona and Sonora, and so on. So, and then you have several levels, several layers of government working together on both sides of the border, and then you see how rich this relationship is. And right now, I guess, under the current circumstances of uncertainty, we are, and particularly the Mexican government is, and this is true even from the campaign, and then after the election, and then after the inauguration, the position of the Mexican government is to try to keep and to try to construct new ways of dialogue with the United States. But the way to go is dialogue, and it's trade, it's going to be immigration at some point, because there are several issues that actually affect us. We recognize that immigration is an issue, and it's a national issue, and every country has the right to put their policies regarding immigration and border management. But we also have immigration flows from Central America that are coming to the United States, and so we need to start to see this from a regional perspective and from a cooperative perspective. So I guess at this point we have trying times, but certainly the dialogue and the cooperation will prevail. That's my sense, and I guess that's the line of work that the current Mexican administration has undertaken.
When you talk about dialogue, what do you actually mean? And I mean, I know you've spent most of your professional career, in country, or however, whatever the term is for it. But when you talk about these high-level dialogues between the governments, I mean, how does that work?
Well, for instance, just to put an example, in the case of border management and immigration, in the case of Mexico, you have at least three different federal agencies dealing with issues that are interconnected. Immigration, so that's the Ministry of the Interior, Secretaría de Gobernación. Border infrastructure, you have the Ministry of Transportation and Communications, but also you have the political part of the border with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And then issues regarding interdicting or fighting dog trafficking. Well, in the U.S. you have several agencies. In the case of Mexico, you have the Ministry of the Interior, but also public safety authorities and the federal police. But the way to organize this dialogue that otherwise will be like a chaos is having a coordinated entity. In the case of Mexico, it's the Secretary of Foreign Affairs. In the case of the United States, it's the State Department. And then start to creating the agendas, the work agendas for specific issues. And then you call people from those that deal with building actual border crossings, and this is your working table. And that's true for the rest of the groups. There are issues that are more difficult to address. There are that pose additional challenges, but then that's when you start to getting additional expertise from people that actually is working on the terrain, on the specific issues, and that's the way that it works. Right now, again, we need to wait and see what is going to be the approach of the U.S. government. But my guess is that at the end of the day, we need to keep addressing this with this dialogue, trying to identify possible solutions. Some of them will be national solutions, but some of them are like international relations experts say will be intermestic. So dealing, and I guess it's very also, again, very clear in the case how border states interact, and that's true also for other parts of the relationship.
One of the things that I found so interesting, let me back up. I used to tell everyone all the time, I said, wow, here I am, this kid from Kansas, and I get to go to another country every day for work. And it was fun. I mean, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of challenges because I was dealing with not just the cultural differences between the U.S. and Mexico, but San Diego, which has its own kind of unique culture, and the culture of Tijuana and Baja, which sees themselves being very much apart from the rest of Mexico in many ways. And then there was the added cultural difference of dealing with the folks out in Imperial County, which is the rural agrarian county due east that I was working with. And I had, a great opportunity to kind of really learn how the border actually works. And so it's interesting to hear you talk about the collaboration on what it takes to address the infrastructure problems. I mean, we know in the whole country we haven't spent as much on keeping our infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, as up to date as they, as they need to be in order for commerce and people to move and do the things that need to be done. But so you think about, and I had actually never thought about this until I worked on these issues. But when you think about if you're in one jurisdiction, if you're in one city and you're building a road and you've done the studies and you realize the population's growing and you need to expand the roads from being, 4 lanes, 2 going one and 2 the other, to add, say, 3 and 3. If you get to the end of your jurisdiction, but the people who are in charge of the jurisdiction on the other side haven't also built 3 and 3, you suddenly have a bottleneck. And I had never really thought about it. I mean, it just wasn't something that I had really ever focused on. So that's why throughout the U.S. there are a lot of regional planning organizations to help address those very issues. Because how are you going to fund them? What's the timetable? I mean, there are all these issues. Now imagine doing it across a border. So you have jurisdictions on both sides because it's going to impact the communities of people who live on both sides. And how many people have been to San Diego before? How many people have been down to the border at least to give it a look-see? Okay, so you know that Tijuana comes right up to the wall, but there's still quite a bit of agriculture and area that hasn't been built yet on the U.S. side. So it makes it a huge challenge to organize this infrastructure that's going to connect and serve this growing population of people who move across the border every day, which, by the way, the Otay, the San Diego, that whole area has more people moving across it on a daily basis than any other land crossing in the world. And then you add all of the industry, the trucks that move back and forth. They have their own crossing, which they're adding a new one. But so how do you do that so you don't have to sit in traffic for hours just to cross the border? How do you do that as two countries and add all of the jurisdictions, local and regional, in order to make this work? And so, as I say, I had never really thought about that until the first time, actually, I hadn't been doing my job very long, and somebody kindly took me down to a meeting in Tijuana, and then as we were coming back, he said, "Christina, I don't have time to sit in traffic with you. You're going to have to get out and cross, because I have a meeting, I have to be back." And he had what's called a Sentry Pass. It's kind of a trusted traveler. You go through a background check, and once you, assuming you pass, it allows you to move through a different lane in an expedited way. And so I was walking over in the pedestrian lane. It still took me several hours. And so as I was calling, once I got to a place where I could actually call the office and saying, well, I can now see, the door to get into, to go through. And I said, I'm going to get my own little Sentry Pass. But seeing how that infrastructure has changed and what that took, if you don't have access to Sentry Passes, or you think of the trucks that come across the border every day, if they're not participating in these trusted traveler kinds of programs that exist for commerce, you think of all the layers of jurisdictions, of different levels of government and bureaucracy to organize that so it can work reasonably well. When I first got to San Diego, I actually taught. I taught at San Diego State, and I taught at City College before I started working on this project. And I had a number of students at both places who lived in Mexico and crossed over every day to go to the university or to the college. And several of them were very straightforward and said, I come over at 4 o'clock or 4:30 in the morning, and then I just sleep in my car, because I never know from day to day what the traffic is going to be like, and I don't want to miss out on class. And it turns out that's a very common phenomenon. So you think about lost productivity because of these kinds of problems. Of course, we all want security, but we need to figure out a way to achieve a reasonable level of security, yet allow commerce to take place, allow this kind of flow of people to come back and forth, whether they're coming to shop or going to university or whatever it is that they're doing. And that works southbound as well. I've gotten hung up in the southbound because the Mexican government asked the U.S. to do checks going southbound. So imagine imagine living in Tijuana and spending 2.5 hours coming into the U.S. to do whatever it is that you were going to do, and turn around and get stuck in 2.5 hours going southbound. So it really, these issues, while they're far away from us here in Kansas, they're nonetheless important because a lot of this is commercial connectivity that impacts us as well. So it was a really interesting lesson in regional planning and infrastructure planning. Now, when you were in San Diego or when you were in Arizona, did you deal with any of these infrastructure issues?
Well, part of the work of the council is also to facilitate. For instance, and you, as you may be aware, most of these binational meetings sometimes occur at the border. But then you have people flying from DC or flying from Mexico City to meet at specific point at the border. So since we don't have all the general vision of those specific issues, we usually facilitate. But also one of the great developments of the U.S.-Mexico relationship was that at some point our countries, were able to manage locally some of the issues affecting the border. So in terms of public safety, but also in terms of facilitating traffic. And at the end, you have also the participation of the federal authorities, but not always. So part of the work that we used to do at the consulates, particularly in the San Diego, the Mexican consulate in San Diego, was through the border liaison mechanism. So we have regular meetings with officials of both sides of the border, I guess with two clear objectives: to foster confidence among authorities, both local and state authorities, that otherwise won't be able to interact with their counterparts in California or Baja California, respectively. And the other is also to get input from those authorities on how to do a better job from the federal perspective. So that proved to be a very useful mechanism. Right now, there are several other initiatives also in the U.S.-Mexico agenda, particularly in terms of economic dialogue, and also in terms of promoting, for instance, growing exchanges of students for STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, because there are more exchange students from other countries, far countries like South Korea, Costa Rica, or China in the United States than from Mexico. And if we have such an integration at the border, it's hard to explain why don't we foster these exchanges, academic exchanges. So we also promote the advancement of small and medium businesses through several other initiatives. So that's a new stage on the relationship. But yeah, I guess the border, with all its dynamism and the inner power, has also forced the government to look for more innovative solutions, and also that allow to take into account what the state and local jurisdictions have to say.
One of the things that has always interested me, and when I was teaching one of my history of Latin America at San Diego State, most of the students I had were either Latin American in background or were from Mexico. They were very interested, obviously, in relations in the whole region, but obviously between U.S. and Mexico. And it was interesting to kind of talk to the students then, so this would have been about 2005, 2006, and about kind of particularly the kids that had grown up in Mexico, about how they had viewed the U.S. relations. I mean, we're so used to thinking about how we view Mexico, but how, current administration aside for a second, how have you seen, or how has, if there is such thing as an average Mexican, just as is there an average American, you know, how are we perceived? My guess is they don't think a whole lot about Kansas, but just in general, how are we perceived? Or maybe you can kind of compare it to what you thought when you were growing up versus once you got here.
Well, I mean, you need to see this through several, glasses. If you are a Mexican from urban background, you probably will have, and there are so many givens also.
Yeah.
Part of your entertainment, part of the movies that you watch, part of the the games, or part of the soft power of the U.S. soft power is clearly present on a daily basis in Mexico. So movies, music, sports. It's important to underline that the biggest NFL fan base outside the United States is in Mexico. So, and then we have matches of Oakland Raiders, Patriots, New England Patriots, and you have the Azteca Stadium full, about 100,000 fans rooting for either for Oakland, I would say. There are more fans of
Except they're
Oakland.
going to be Vegas, the Vegas Raiders.
And then the tourism authorities in Mexico are promoting a new match for this year. Then, and people will be in attendance, regardless what is happening currently in the relationship. But yes, again, those are givens. But at some point, and this also has taken years to build. But at some point, when you start hearing a different narrative or even some animosity against Mexico and Mexican nationals as a whole, then it's sure that some people in Mexico, some of my friends, that they know that I work here, and I've been posted abroad a lot of that time, they can imagine themselves working or living outside of Mexico at any point of their lives. So they are start asking questions of, okay, how is living there? Do you feel okay? Do you feel threatened? And at some point, those givens might start changing if both governments are not able to, again, take the way of dialogue and cooperation. And that's quite important. But again, the soft power is present there, and it's been present for a long time. So that would be, if you are a Mexican of urban background. If you are more from rural background, you might, and this is true for both parts of the society, you may have a friend or a member of your family that actually has immigrated to the United States. So you have additional contacts, you have additional links that are present for the U.S. Mexico relationship. So it's very difficult to have a clear reading of what is happening or what is thinking the average Mexican about the United States as a whole. But certainly, I would say that many Mexicans are aware of what is happening in the current federal administration, and they are also not just waiting, but demanding the Mexican government to act, and to act to take a firm and active attitude in order to defend the country, to defend the good image of the country, but also those the large population, the large Mexican and Mexican American communities that live here.
I know later on in some of our future discussions, we're going to get into NAFTA a little bit more as well, but what do you think, since you actually work for the Mexican government, what do you think the benefits will be for, to both countries, or actually all three countries, since NAFTA is a relationship between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico? What do you think the benefits might be of renegotiating? As opposed to kind of looking at it as, wow, this is going to be something bad for everybody, or one country is going to be the winner and the other two not so much. How could tackling NAFTA kind of be something that would be positive for everybody?
Yeah, well, just a few days ago, the U.S. government made the announcement that they are willing to undergo the negotiations with NAFTA. Words are important. Words are important in international relations and are important in diplomacy. And we need to see what is going to be the outcome of this willingness of the United States to go ahead and have this 90-day consultation process and then start negotiating with Mexico. We can talk about renegotiating, we can talk about modernizing to overhaul it, or you name it. But at the end of the day, you need to see, for instance, in the case of Kansas and Mexico relationship and trade, trade between Kansas and Mexico has grown almost 500% since the NAFTA was enacted. And then you start to see that, for instance, part of the industry in the southwestern Kansas, the meat industry, are closely related to Mexico. Some of the businesses that are working there, they have close relation. And also, obviously, those exporting grains and corn and wheat, they are closely related to Mexico. And then, on the other hand, if we see, okay, that the trade is not fair, or NAFTA is not fair, we could say the same for Kansas, because Kansas sells more to Mexico than Mexico buys from Kansas. So Kansas last year, back in 2015, sold to Mexico about $1.9 billion. Mexico just sold to Kansas $800 million. So, but it's not about trade, or it's not about trade balance. It's about that we are creating a productive change. And for instance, I was reading last night that the Corona beer, a Mexican beer, and that you have, I mean, you think there's something, a few things more Mexican than a Corona beer. Well, it's produced with some grains that are actually exported to Mexico from Idaho.
Wow.
So what would Idaho growers will say if they at some point see this relationship interrupted or even renegotiated? So you will have to start seeing what are the sectors that need to be renegotiated, or what are the disciplines or the rules to be affected, but also what are the new areas of international trade that were not present 25 years ago, like e-trade, like telecommunications, like energy. And then you will get a better sense of what is at stake, and certainly what are the opportunities. I guess we need to see, the idea here is to see towards opportunities and not looking back to trying to, regain some tariffs or impose restrictions to the trade. Because again, it's not only trade, it's also how the competitivity and also the production of the three countries are integrated.
So I know that questions and answers are kind of how a major part of these discussions. But a couple of more questions for you first from me.
Sure.
And the obvious one for me is, given how different all three places that you served recently, San Diego, Arizona, and Kansas, what's Kansas shine in for you? I mean, what's something that like when you go home to Mexico City to visit family and things like that, what do you I'm sure they don't have a difficult time imagining what it's like being in San Diego or even in Arizona, but in Kansas, I can imagine, heck, I still get it when I travel. Really, Kansas? What's it like there? What do you tell them? I mean, what's some of the best things about being in Kansas for you?
Well, and I have learned this from a very good friend of mine, Secretary of Commerce, Antonio Suave of Kansas. I mean, he's not a Kansan, but from Kansas, but he is so adamant promoting his state and all the great things that Kansas has to offer. But even, I've been in this post only less than 1 year. But then you start to see, for instance, this is, I guess, the fourth or third time that I'm in Lawrence, in KU campus. And then you have to see universities like KU or the UM system in Missouri, and also K-State, because, I don't want to create any conflict here. But, and you see also the quality of life, and particularly how, you have great corporations here, like in the Kansas side, you have Sprint, or you have also Garmin, and then you see that how many engineers and professionals and families from all over the world are coming here. Then you start to see this part of the world, this part of the country, like also, as I mentioned at the beginning, there are many people, many businesses with a welcoming tradition, with a welcoming attitude, and also that they see the benefits of being in close contact with the rest of the world. So that, but also from the cultural perspective, you have the Nelson Atkins Museum, and it's not only from Missouri, it's, I guess I would say this for this region. You have also the Kaufman Center and several other, you have Sporting Kansas, the soccer team that is attracting so many young people to practice sports, and it's a great way to integrate communities, children of all ages, and also boys and girls, to practice a sport that 25, 30 years ago, I mean, it was a rarity in the United States, see people playing soccer, and then you have these U.S. Mexico matches and everybody goes crazy. So you have so many things to offer, but yeah, the vision of many people in Mexico is, well, Kansas, okay, yeah, Kansas City Chiefs if you are an NFL fan, or Kansas City Royals because they are the 2015 World Champions, and maybe the music, perhaps the barbecue, and that's it. But I guess part of my work as a Mexican diplomat, but also part of the work of the authorities, and I guess the case of Mr. Antonio Suarez is a great example, is also to promote their countries, their regions, their states, so that they are seen as a good option if you are planning to put some investment, you are conducting business, or maybe send your kids to school, or have a master in a foreign university, so that you get the contact with a different culture. So that's, and particularly in Kansas, in Missouri, we have some issues with in-state tuition for DACA students, but I mean, we are talking about immigration now, but yeah, I would say you have a very clear, several very good components in terms of economics, in terms of culture, in terms of quality of life in this part of the country.
I think he gets it. So, and so this is the time, I've already gotten the little note. It's time to start open up to questions. So,
yes.
Obviously, your duties involve a lot of economic issues.
Oh, sorry, we say it into the mic.
Sure. Many of your duties, of course, involve economic issues, but I was wondering, to what extent does your role involve promoting Mexican art and cultural organizations in the Midwest?
Oh, yes. You know, and now that you mentioned, part of my work is promoting trade and economics, and this is new for Mexican diplomats, because actually, for many Mexican diplomats, because actually the trade authority in Mexico, the economy authority in Mexico is the area of expertise of a different ministry, the Ministry of Economy. But being a diplomat and being a representative of your country abroad, you need to have a clear perception of what is happening in your country, what are the benefits of your country as a trade partner with the United States, but also with several other countries in the world, and that has become a very, very important part of any Mexican diplomat posted in the United States at the present time. But culture, and I recently mentioned soft power. Culture is a great, great ambassador of Mexico abroad. I guess we have not only the traditional or the folk art, but we have a growing presence of Mexican talents in the movie industry, and they've been successful here in the United States. But you also have the great masters of art, Diego, Frida, all the painting and sculptures. So yes, that also involves a great part of the work. But having 50 consulates in the United States, if you have a major exhibit, for instance, on Mexican revolutionary art, or on Mexican muralists, or new creators on sculptures, and then you start, authorities in my country start to create these circuits that you may be visiting the Museum of Modern Art in Dallas, or in Los Angeles, or New York, and part of my concern in this last year is also putting in the table of my authorities back in central headquarters, hey, you have a great cultural institutions here in the Midwest, and it's also a great opportunity to promote not only Mexico here, but also to foster a greater understanding of what is Mexico nowadays. So in addition to the mariachi or the tequila, we have several cultural features that I saw that most of you have visited my country, that you will be surprised, or many people in this part of the country will be surprised of learning that how important and how rich is Mexico in terms of culture. So part of my work is also promoting these initiatives, and I guess one of the greatest histories of success happening here in the Kansas City metro area is the activity of Day of the Dead activity in the Nelson Atkins Museum. It's one of the 5 cultural festivals that the Nelson Atkins Museum have every year. I guess one for India, one for China, one for, I don't remember, but on November, we have the Day of Death festival in the Nelson Atkins Museum. Last year, it was the most successful festival or open to the public activity of Nelson Atkins Museum. They received in one single day now 9,000 visitors. And the good thing is that those visitors, obviously there were many people of the Mexican community, but there are also people from all walks of life, from obviously from the U.S., first generation U.S. citizens, people from Kansas, people from Missouri, visiting and having this great interest in learning on what is this Day of the Dead. We also have some theater display, so that's also the work that we do, and we are always looking for partners that help us to promote the Mexican culture.
Thank you. In this Kansas City area, one of the key industries, which we don't have as much of anymore, used to be meat packing at the stockyards and so on. And the people who came into work there, I think there was a fair number that came from Mexico to work in those places. And the Guadalupe Center on the Missouri side and on the Kansas side, El Centro, have long histories, along with the Catholic Church and different parishes in those areas. And so one of my questions, and I'll wait for later for my other questions, but one of my questions is the role of the consulate in working with local community organizations such as Guadalupe, El Centro, or any other such organizations that are out there. If you have that kind of relationship, can you talk about that? And I had one other organization I was thinking of, and that is COHO. I think it's still in existence, the Coalition of Hispanic Organizations, perhaps. I'm not sure if they're as active as they were, but I'll let you speak to that.
Yes, we do. We certainly work with them, and El Centro Incorporated and Guadalupe Centers are major partners of us. And it's also a great feature of this part of the country. Given the long tradition and the long history of Mexican immigration to this part of the country, back to the end of the 19th century because of the railroad, and then because of the Mexican Revolution, and then because of the consecutive waves of immigration to work in the fields, to work in the meat industry, and so on. So yes, and actually, particularly Guadalupe Centers, they will be 100 years in 2019. So the work of them is also because of the need of serving those new immigrants to this part of the country that were not able to access to decent housing or to any other services. And I can just imagine how difficult it was for them almost 100 years ago. And I guess charity and caring for others is a great tradition in this country, but I guess Guadalupe centers, they took this to another level, serving actually these new immigrants. So yes, and they have extensive a network of schools, legal services, community services that, as I mentioned, we at the consulate, my staff is 22 people, and we have to serve a large consular district. So we can, and we don't pretend to do everything by ourselves. Part of my work is also establishing networks of cooperation and to finding commonalities with these organizations. And they are doing also a great work in those areas. For instance, in the case of El Centro, they are also promoting actively that those Mexican nationals or any other immigrants that are legal permanent residents in the United States and are eligible to apply for citizenship, for U.S. citizenship, they are promoting them to do that, because that's a way also to enhance their civic participation, enhance also the integration of the society that they call home. And at the end of the day, they also will be able to participate politically. Regardless of what their political preferences are, they certainly, the more active that they are, they will be more integrated and they will be more productive and more active members of the society. So that's also a recently new line of work that we are also promoting in order to better serve, in this case, the Mexican population. But yes, in the case of Oleita, there's the Oleita Latino Coalition. They are also very active in that part of Kansas. And then as we face also the need to provide services to distant communities like in southwestern Kansas, we also have some networks of cooperation there with organizations or with local individuals that are working maybe in the city hall or through community centers or through scholar districts, so that they can help us to provide services or to refer us cases that may require assistance from the consulate.
This is probably for Christina. You talked about making decisions between the countries, like the highways and all, without getting too complicated. How do you do that? Are those all federal things? And is it like federal government with the government of Mexico, the consulates, the two towns together? And do you have to agree on things, or do we have to agree on things like what roads are made out of and all like that? Or is it kind of you build your 3 lanes and we'll build out?
Well, actually, we'll both answer that. From what I experienced, from what I saw, because of the complexity of the actual physical border itself, all the things that you have to have on the border, the checkpoints, are you just building a crossing for pedestrians or for people who are visiting, or is it a commercial crossing? Are you just focusing on trucks? The decisions ultimately are made at the federal level because you've got this physical infrastructure that by treaty has to, and correct me if I'm wrong, but so you have the 2 federal governments, one all the way in Mexico City and one all the way in DC, who have to come together and work on that level. And that's, I won't even go into all the acronyms of the agencies that have to be at the table to kind of work that piece out. But then you know, if you're a wise federal government, you make sure at the table are all the local stakeholders. Because, they're getting better about that. I can say on the U.S. side, they just finished within the last year or two, redoing the whole kind of Tijuana crossing. So if that's where you ever crossed, it would look quite different now. And it's much more efficient, bigger, just a whole range of things that you can say, like, wow, how did they do this? And having been in some of the stakeholder meetings where I heard local representatives of different nonprofits that kind of serve a lot of these border communities. A lot of people, for example, walk across the border to come to work, and then they pick up the trolley system on the U.S. side. And nobody bothered to talk to any of the local stakeholders on either side about what their needs might be in terms of, so they just kind of threw that in, and they made it much further to go originally. And so that was something that the federal government on the U.S. side had to kind of back and say, okay, how could we do this differently?
Could I share? There's
Sure.
things called MPO that we have in the United States.
Right.
Metropolitan Planning Organization.
Right.
Everything in over 50,000 population has one of those that coordinates all those between the cities and the counties and so on and so on. So that answers your question.
That answers her question in terms of yes, the Metropolitan Planning Authority in San Diego is called SANDAG, San Diego Association of Governments. And I worked very closely with them because they were interested in one of my projects, which was creating an online map of that could be searchable of the entire, what we were calling the mega region, my project. And so it had all of the key industries plotted. So if Kyocera or Samsung or whatever company it was, you could see where it was, how big the plant was, and that was of interest to SANDAG because they, if you wait till you need to build it, it's going to be obsolete. Yeah. So a lot of these metropolitan planning authorities along the border are trying to anticipate the growth and the needs of the industries, as well as who else uses the border. I mean, like, who's using it to move across and what are their needs? And that's where the regional authority, the state authority, but the feds, first and foremost, because they're the ones that own a lot of the infrastructure. So it's a very complicated process, and when something gets done, it's amazing.
Yeah, I just would say that, for instance, one of the most recent examples, because there are so many examples, for instance, the major border crossing in the San Diego-Tijuana area is basically for private automobiles and pedestrians. And so, but it's so congested. So at some point, the authorities decided that and it's a two-way, you can cross into the United States, but you also can cross into Mexico. So the idea was to convert this port of entry just for entering the United States and diverting to the west the port of entry into Mexico. But since you have to affect public land, but also county land and federal land, you need to coordinate closely. Another example was when there was this need to expand the commercial cargo facility. They need to create a corridor on federal land that allows to the trucks to drive through to the port of entry, because the rest of the land was unavailable local, municipal land. So they have to figure out some specific solutions for a very present need. That's why planning is so important, because you start to figure out, well, we have this land that is not available anymore, so do we, and in the case of Tijuana, San Diego, there's a limit for the construction that you can do to the west, because you have the Pacific Ocean, so everything goes to the east. But I guess one of the recent stories of success histories is the recent building of a bridge, actually a bridge, that connects from the Tijuana airport, that is basically in one side of the Mexican border. And if you come into Mexico, from any airport from Mexico to Tijuana, then you land, you cross the bridge over the international lane, and then you walk into the United States. And obviously, through a immigration and customs facility, you produce your documents, you are authorized to cross, and then you continue. But the amount of time and productivity that actually benefit for constructing this building was so important. But on the other side of the border, in the U.S. side, before this project was actually built, you have only empty warehouses and empty lots that then need to be reconverted in order to facilitate the crossing. So that's why it's important that both governments are coordinated, and at some point they share the value and the utility of the value of one specific border project. Mm-hmm.
We know that it's not just the southern border states that rely a lot on international labor to do their business. We have a lot of businesses here in Kansas that also rely on international labor. My question is, has the U.S. government's current position on the border and on international travel across the border, is that making it more difficult for international labor to get across the border and up north to the businesses that rely on them? And if not, I mean, what are those businesses going to do? And do your consulates here in the United States, are you able to have any kind of pressure on the government to try to make it easier for this international travel to get across the border?
Yeah, a growing presence in not only in U.S.-Mexico relations, but in international relations as a whole, is particularly the private sector and the local jurisdictions, and obviously no government organizations. So they also have a constant and growing role in giving input to the governments by the way of pressure in case of the NGOs, but also the private sector, to offer hard evidence, hard data on how a specific public policy decision may affect not only the political relationship between those countries, but to the workers, to the businesses, and all the relations that have been established as a consequence of a good relations with a partner, like is the case of Mexico and the United States. So obviously the governments have the power or the tools of diplomacy, of dialogue, and several other traditional resources, but obviously the lobby and all resources. But in the case of Mexico, when, for instance, when NAFTA was negotiated, there was this addition to the negotiating team, that is the people next door, the people next room, that actually were representatives from the private sector or for specific sectors of Mexican economy, agriculture, factories, etc. So I guess in that particular question that you posed to me, is the private sector, the businesses and people, and yes, businesses that are attracting international labor, they also have a say, and a big say to the government, both in Mexico and the United States, as to how to improve the relationship without affecting vital business or any other interests that actually are creating jobs and helping regional and national economies to thrive.
Most people can hear me without the microphone, but are you a career politician, or are you appointed by the current administration in Mexico?
Yes, thanks for your question. No, I'm a career diplomat, so okay. I'm not an elected official.
That's why I was curious. Yes. The other question I have is that it seems to me that if the federal government of Mexico, and as well as the regional governments, would show a little more, I don't know, I guess attitude of keeping some of the illegals, okay, from coming across the border, because we seem like we have to do most of the policing to try to keep them and send them back, okay, rather than your federal government keeping them from going across the border. Is that true or not?
Well, actually, there are, in the last years, the immigration intensity, that is, the number of people crossing into the United States from Mexico, is less than those actually returning to the United States, to Mexico. So you have a decreasing number, and I guess since 2012, I guess, a decreasing number of people crossing into the United States, both legally or illegally or without documents, to work or to live here. So, and then you have a growing number of people from other nationalities coming through the United States, not only through Mexican soil, but also through regular channels with a visa, and then they overstay their visas. That is true for the case, for instance, of Canadians, of some other nationalities. So when you start to see the immigration problem as a whole, you will see that the problem is not only a Mexican problem. And,
Well, I don't disagree with that.
and
But
but,
I'm just saying that border is where they're coming across, where they're coming from Honduras or Guatemala, or wherever they're coming from. They're coming up through your country
right.
and into our country, and I'm curious.
Yes, and of
But
course,
we have 11 million of them here that's undocumented, or you call, I call it illegal, they're here now.
yeah, but
They're not going back.
but the thing is that in every country, I mean, immigration is, I guess, in a traditional way of international relations, I guess is the most traditional evidence of public policy. Every country has the right to apply or to enforce their immigration policy. And that's true, and that is true for the case of Mexico. We have a southern border. We have some, immigration enforcement, but also, and this is true also in terms of the current advancement of human rights. We recognize that some of these people are crossing into Mexico because of humanitarian needs, and even offer, for instance, asylum or refuge in Mexico. They are not willing to accept that kind of relief because their goal is to cross into Mexico to continue all the way to the United States. So we need to start, for instance, one of the topics that Mexico is willing to advance with the United States is how, as a countries, and particularly two large countries like our Mexico and the United States, how we are able to create opportunities and economic development back in Central America to avoid those crossings, because these people is coming either to Mexico or the United States, either fleeing from violence or looking for a better opportunities in terms of providing for their families. And then when you put that into the equation, you have a more complex problem other than enforcing immigration laws, because that then you also have criminal organizations involved all across the immigration circuit. You have also humanitarian situations that also have to be need to be addressed. But yeah, it's a very, very complex issue.
Another question completely
Sure.
related to that.
Yes, sir.
Is that I am a small manufacturer, and I've been sourcing a lot of products from China because I can't find good, reliable, quality products from the United States. A lot of the manufacturers here, they're not competitive, and so forth and so on. I'm very up to here with China, okay, for a number of reasons. I would be interested in seeing if you might connect me and my company with some of your manufacturers down there to possibly see if we could make a deal to me to buy some of those products.
Yes, certainly.
Would you be interested in doing that?
That's part of
Knowing that I'm a conservative, so you know.
that's part of my job. That's part also
Okay.
of promoting, for instance, Mexican goods to find markets for them in the United States. Yes, sir.
we have time for one more?
This is part a question, maybe partly a statement. My son-in-law was born, his mother's Chilean. He was born in Venezuela. He's multilingual and works in the school systems here in the metropolitan area, both as ESL and other roles. He's helped me learn to appreciate some of the dilemmas of other countries that are in Central America and South America. I think for people who are south of the American border, it must seem difficult sometimes to make sense of when we say, as Americans, we put out a big front, we don't, we're against drugs, we have a big law enforcement effort to stop drugs, and yet we're the largest market and the largest consumers of drugs for whatever manages to make its way up from the south. We also say we don't want illegals, we don't want unauthorized immigration into our country, and yet we allow any employer who wants to hire undocumented workers without penalty. And we've done that forever. There's never been an attempt to crack down on employers, seriously, around those issues. So it's got to seem a little schizoid to anyone watching all of this. And my heart goes out to individuals such as yourself who are kind of in the middle of this terrain, working, you get incoming from all directions. And I think you're performing a really essential role, not just for Mexico, but also for the United States. We benefit greatly from having someone like you with your experience and background here in our area. And I appreciate what you're doing, and I appreciate Christine making it possible for you to be here. So that's my statement part, and thank you. I appreciate
Thank you very much. Thanks, sir, for your kind words, and thanks.
So, I'm getting the hook sign over here. So thank you all for coming today. I hope you learned something that you didn't know before. I hope you learned a little bit too.
Yes, thank you,
from some of the
Christina.
questions, and I really appreciate it and hope to see you all in the next discussion group. So, thank you.
Thank you, Sam.